Another ugly sweater. Does she think the baby is a circus clown? The words glowed on my phone screen. My niece, Jessica, had sent them. But they weren't for me. The group chat was named Dealing with Grandma Carol. My thumb felt clumsy and thick as I scrolled up. There were dozens of messages about my casseroles being dry, about how I told the same stories over and over, about my knitting. My son Mark, Jessica's father, had sent a laughing emoji. I set the phone down on the polished oak table. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly seemed very loud. My living room, usually so cozy with its afghans and the scent of cinnamon potpourri, felt cold. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands resting in my lap, and watched the dust motes dance in the afternoon sunbeam cutting across the rug. My heart didn't feel broken. It felt still, like a clock that had stopped ticking. The next morning, I folded the baby blanket I had just finished. It was for Jessica's new son, due in a few weeks. I had used the expensive merino wool she'd pointed out in the craft store, the one that felt like a cloud. The color was a soft robin's egg blue. I ran my hand over the tiny, even stitches. Each one was a prayer for the baby's health. Each one was a piece of my love. My phone rang. It was my son, Mark. The sound made my teeth ache. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful and loud. "Just checking in. How's everything?" "Everything is fine, dear," I said. My own voice sounded steady. It surprised me. "Great. Great. Listen, is that blanket almost done? Jessica's baby shower is next Saturday, and she's counting on it for the big reveal." I looked at the perfect blue blanket folded on my armchair. "I just finished it," I told him. "You can pick it up tomorrow." I went to my desk in the spare bedroom. The air smelled of old paper and the lavender sachet I kept in the drawer. I pulled out my checkbook. My late husband, Frank, had always said to be careful with our savings, but he also said family was everything. I was helping Jessica and her husband with the down payment on their new house. A little something from my Social Security each month, tucked away for them. I wrote the check carefully, my handwriting still neat. $5,000. As I signed my name, Carol Ann Miller, I thought of a picture on the mantel. It was Jessica, age 4, wearing a bright red sweater I had knitted for her. It had little yellow ducks on it, her favorite. The words from the group chat floated back into my head. A circus clown. The phone rang later that afternoon. It was Jessica. Her voice was sugary sweet. "Grandma? Dad said the blanket is ready? You are just the best. I can't wait to see it." "It was no trouble, dear," I said, looking at the check on the desk. "Oh, and listen," she went on. "Don't forget, we need your final head count for Christmas dinner. It's at our new house this year, but you're still doing the turkey, right?" "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." On Tuesday, I drove to the copy shop downtown. The bell over the door jingled, and the air smelled of hot plastic and toner. A young man with blue hair was behind the counter, tapping on a computer. "Can I help you, Mom?" he asked politely. "Yes," I said, pulling my phone from my purse. "I need to print some screenshots. In color, please. On the good glossy paper." I had taken a picture of every single comment in the Dealing with Grandma Carol group chat. The boy didn't blink. He just took my phone and got to work. A few minutes later, he handed me a stack of shiny papers. The cruel words looked so sharp and clear. "Anything else?" he asked. "One more thing," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'd like to have each one of these laminated." He nodded and took the pages. I stood by the counter and watched the machine hum. It sealed each insult, each laughing emoji in a tough, clear plastic shell. It made them permanent. Back home, I laid the laminated pages out on my dining room table. There were 7 of them. One for my son, Mark, one for his wife, one for Jessica and her husband, and a few for my other grandchildren who had chimed in. They looked like placemats. The afternoon light made them gleam. I ran my finger over one of them. Jessica's comment about the circus clown sweater. It was smooth and cool to the touch, with no power to hurt me anymore. It was just evidence now. I gathered them up, a neat, stiff stack. I walked to the linen closet in the hallway. It smelled of cedar and clean cotton. I opened the bottom drawer, the one where I keep the special tablecloth and the good napkins, the ones we only use for Christmas and Easter. I placed the laminated comments inside, right on top of the folded red cloth. Then I closed the drawer. The sound was a soft, satisfying thud. Christmas was still 3 months away. I had plenty of time to plan the menu. Jessica's baby shower was held at a fancy restaurant with cloth napkins and tiny sandwiches with the crusts cut off. The room was filled with pastel balloons and the high, bright chatter of women. It smelled of perfume and powdered sugar from the 3-tiered cake. I found my seat at a table with Mark's wife, Susan, and some of Jessica's friends. Susan patted my arm. "Carol, that blanket you made is the star of the show. Jessica put it right on the gift table for everyone to see." I looked over. The soft blue blanket was draped over a rocking chair, looking perfect under the restaurant lights. A few young women were touching it, murmuring about how soft it was. Jessica came over, her belly round under a pink dress. "Grandma, everyone loves it. See? I told you you're the best." She hugged me, her cheek cool against mine. "It's a beautiful party, dear," I said, my voice even. I smiled at her. It felt like I was moving my mouth in a way I had learned long ago but had forgotten the meaning of. I watched her talk about the baby, her hands resting on her stomach, and all I could see were the words she had typed on her phone. A week later, my phone rang on a Wednesday morning. It was Mark. I usually called him on Tuesdays, but I had been busy repotting my geraniums. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. "Mum, is everything okay?" he asked. There was a little edge of impatience in his voice. "You didn't call yesterday." "I'm fine, Mark. Just busy," I said, wiping a bit of soil from the kitchen counter with a damp cloth. The sun was streaming through the window, making the water droplets sparkle. "Oh, okay. Well, Jessica was wondering if you could knit a few more things for the baby. A little hat and some matching booties, in that same blue wool." I paused. I looked at my knitting basket by the armchair. It was full of soft yarn in warm colours. It had always been my joy. Now it just looked like a basket of string. "I'm not sure I'll have the time, dear," I said calmly. "My arthritis is acting up a bit." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Oh," he said finally. "Well, okay then. I'll tell her." He sounded confused, like I'd just answered a simple question in a foreign language. Thanksgiving was at Mark and Susan's house. The air was thick with the smell of roasting turkey and sage dressing. The television was on, a football game blaring in the background, but no one was watching it. I brought my sweet potato casserole with the marshmallow topping. Jessica, now very pregnant, took a big spoonful. Grandma, this is the best. It wouldn't be Thanksgiving without it." I remembered the text from Susan in the group chat. Another holiday, another dry casserole from Carol. "Smile and eat, people." I smiled at Jessica. "I'm so glad you like it, honey." Later, I was helping Susan clear the plates. The dishwasher hummed, and the sink was full of warm, soapy water. "You've been quiet today, Carol," she said, not looking at me. "Everything all right?" Everything is perfect, I said, handing her a soapy plate. Just enjoying the family. The first week of December, the air turned sharp and cold. I called my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. His office was in an old brick building downtown, and it smelled of leather and floor wax. "Carol, good to see you," he said, shaking my hand. He was a kind man with white hair, about my age. "What can I do for you? Just a little review of the paperwork?" "Something like that," I said, sitting in the big leather chair across from his desk. "I want to make some changes to my will, and I want to set up a trust for my great-grandson." He listened patiently as I laid out my plans. I wanted the bulk of my estate to go into a trust for the baby, to be managed by the bank until he was 25. I wanted a portion to go to the local animal shelter. My son, Mark, would be left the house, but nothing else. "Are you sure about this, Carol?" Mr. Henderson asked gently. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. The check for Jessica's down payment was still in my desk drawer at home. It was going to stay there. The baby was born on a Tuesday, a week before Christmas. Jessica sent a photo to my phone. A tiny, red-faced thing wrapped in a plain white hospital blanket. They named him Leo. My phone rang that evening. It was Jessica, her voice thin and tired. "Hi, Grandma. Did you see the picture?" "I did, dear. He's a beautiful baby. Congratulations." I felt a genuine warmth for this new little person, this innocent soul. "He's so tiny," she said, and I could hear the wonder in her voice. Then it changed. "His feet are so cold, though. I wish he had some of your little booties to wear." I looked around my quiet living room. The Christmas tree was up, its lights twinkling softly. The house was peaceful. My knitting basket sat in the corner, untouched. "I'm sure you can find some nice ones at the store," I said. "You get some rest now." Before she could answer, I said a gentle goodbye and hung up the phone. I walked over to the linen closet and opened the bottom drawer. The 7 laminated placemats were right where I left them. They felt heavy in my hands, solid, like promises. A few days before Christmas, I went to the bank. The lobby was decorated with cheap tinsel and a sad-looking fake tree. The air smelled of wet wool coats and that clean money smell. I sat down with a young woman named Tiffany, who had very long, bright pink fingernails that clicked on her keyboard. I explained that I wanted to close a savings account I held jointly with my son, Mark, and move the funds into a new certificate of deposit under my name only. Tiffany looked at the screen, then at me over her glasses. "Are you sure, Mrs. Miller? This account has been open for a long time." "Yes, I'm quite sure," I said. She gave me a tight, professional smile. "It's just that sometimes, at your age, these financial decisions can be confusing." I looked at her pink nails, then met her eyes. "The only thing I find confusing, Tiffany, is why you think my age has anything to do with my ability to manage my own money." Her smile vanished. She processed the transfer in silence. That afternoon, Mark called. The sound of baby Leo crying was faint in the background. "Hey, Mom. Listen, Jessica and I were at the bank. We're trying to finalize the mortgage paperwork for the new house." "That's nice, dear," I said, watching a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside my window. It was a bright splash of red against the white snow. "Yeah, well, we were counting on that down payment gift from you. The 5,000? Did you forget to drop off the check?" His voice was casual, but I could hear the tension underneath. I thought of the check, still in my desk drawer. "It must have slipped my mind," I said. "So much to do before the holiday, you know." "Right," he said slowly. "Well, Can you bring it on Christmas Day? We really need to get it deposited next week. I'll see what I can do, Mark, I told him. And then I said I had to go check on my roast. I wasn't cooking a roast. My church friend, Margaret, called me for our weekly chat. She'd been a widow for 10 years and knew what it was to feel alone in a crowded room. Her voice was like a warm blanket. How are you holding up, Carol? This time of year can be tough. I'm doing all right, Margaret, I said, sitting in my favourite armchair. The wool was soft and worn. I'm just tidying things up in my life. That sounds mysterious, she said with a little laugh. Don't tell me you're finally throwing out Frank's collection of bottle caps. I smiled. Something like that. You get to a point where you realize you're carrying things that aren't yours to carry anymore. Other people's expectations. Old habits. I paused, watching the dust motes swirl in a sunbeam. You know, the kids called yesterday, needing this, needing that. It's always something. Tell me about it, she sighed. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a service they call when they need it. A quiet clarity settled over me, as simple and true as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I finally understood, I said softly. I didn't get old. I just stopped being useful to them. And there was a strange kind of freedom in that. On Christmas Eve, the house was quiet, except for the soft music from the radio. The air smelled of pine needles and the gingerbread cookies I had baked that morning. Not for the family. For me. I arranged them on one of my good china plates. I packed a large tote bag for the next day. The heavy roasting pan for the turkey went in first, wrapped in towels to keep it from clanging. Then the sweet potato casserole, ready for the oven. My silver serving spoons, polished until they shone. Everything they expected. Then I went to the linen closet. I took out the special red tablecloth, the one Frank had bought me for our last anniversary together. I folded it carefully and placed it in a separate, smaller bag. On top of it, I laid the stack of 7 laminated placemats. They were cool and stiff. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet house. Christmas morning was bright and cold. The sun on the snow was blinding. My phone buzzed at 9 o'clock. It was Jessica. Grandma? Merry Christmas. Are you on your way over soon? We want to open the presents with Leo. Merry Christmas, dear, I said. I'll be there in a little while. I didn't rush. I made myself a pot of tea and drank it at my kitchen table, looking out at my frozen garden. I watched the sparrows flit back and forth from the feeder. For the first time in years, I wasn't flustered. I wasn't worried about the turkey being dry or the rolls being warm. An hour later, I put on my good wool coat and my favourite pearl earrings. I picked up my purse. Then I picked up the 2 bags waiting by the door. One held the dinner they wanted. The other held the truth they were about to receive. I felt perfectly calm. Jessica's new house was in one of those new neighbourhoods where all the houses looked the same. It smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. The rooms were large and mostly empty, and our voices echoed a little. Grandma, you're here. Jessica greeted me at the door, shifting baby Leo in her arms. The turkey smells amazing already. Hello, dear. Merry Christmas, I said, kissing her cheek. The baby was tiny, his little face wrinkled and serious. Mark came from the living room, a cup of coffee in his hand. Mom, Merry Christmas. You're a saint for doing the turkey. He gave me a quick hug. He lowered his voice. Did you remember to bring that envelope for Jessica? For the house? I smiled at him. Everything I brought is in the bags, Mark. Let me get my coat off. I walked past them into the new, shiny kitchen and set the heavy roaster on the counter. The silence from the living room felt heavy. I spent the next hour in the kitchen. It was one of those fancy kitchens with a stainless steel refrigerator that could make 3 kinds of ice. I basted the turkey and put my casserole in the oven. The sounds of my family drifted in from the other room. Laughter. The television reporting on holiday traffic. Baby Leo fussing and then quieting. Susan, my daughter-in-law, came in, her face a little flushed. "Carol, thank you again. This place is still such a mess. I don't know what I would have done." She opened the oven door and peeked at my sweet potatoes. Perfect, as always. I remembered her text message. "Smile and eat, people." I just nodded and continued to stir the gravy. I felt like a hired cook. A familiar feeling. I didn't mind it today. Today, it was part of the plan. Later, Jessica came into the kitchen, bouncing Leo on her hip. "Everyone's getting hungry, Grandma. Should we set the table?" "That's a good idea," I said, wiping my hands on my apron. "I'll get the tablecloth." I went to the front hall where I had left my smaller bag. No one paid me any mind. They were all cooing over the baby. I took out the beautiful red tablecloth and my special bag of placemats. I walked into the dining room. The big wooden table was bare, waiting. It was a perfect stage. Susan followed me in. "Oh, Carol, that's your good cloth. Is that okay in this new house?" "It's Christmas," I said simply. "It's for special occasions." I shook it out. The rich red fabric fell over the table, instantly making the empty room feel warmer. Susan went back to the living room. I was alone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of laminated pages. They made a soft, slick sound as they separated. I started with Mark's seat at the head of the table. I chose the screenshot of his laughing emoji response to Jessica's comment. I placed it right where his plate would go. Next was Susan's seat. She got the one about my dry casseroles. For Jessica, I saved her finest work. Another ugly sweater. Does she think the baby is a circus clown? I placed it carefully by her wine glass. I continued around the table, giving each person the gift of their own words. My grandson, who had called my stories boring. His girlfriend, who had made fun of my old car. I set out the silverware on top of each one. The fork, the knife, the spoon. Each setting was a little shrine to their own unkindness. The room was silent, except for the hum of the furnace and the muffled laughter from the other room. The turkey was golden brown. The gravy was smooth. The mashed potatoes were steaming in my big ceramic bowl. I took off my apron and smoothed down my dress. Everything was ready. I walked to the archway between the dining room and the living room. They were all there. Jessica showing someone pictures of Leo on her phone. Mark watching a football game. They looked happy, comfortable. I took a breath. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted meat. It smelled like 1,000 other family dinners, but this one would be different. "Dinner is served," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise. "Please, everyone, come to the table." They came in from the living room, still laughing about something on the football game. Mark pulled out the chair at the head of the table for himself. He was the first to see it. He stopped, his hand hovering over the back of the chair. "What's this?" he said. His voice was no longer cheerful. Susan came to her seat beside him and peered down. Her smile froze on her face. Jessica, holding Leo, stopped behind her own chair. The happy chatter died out completely. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the gurgle from the baby. One by one, they looked down at their place settings. They saw their own words, printed in black and white, sealed in plastic. Jessica's face went pale. She read her placemat, the one about the circus clown sweater. Her eyes flickered up to mine, wide with a kind of horror. She looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Mark picked his up. The plastic made a soft slapping sound as he set it back down. His face was turning a dull red. "Mum?" he said, and the word was low and dangerous. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke?" I stood at the other end of the table by the platters of food. The turkey steamed, smelling of home and holidays. I looked at each of them, meeting their eyes. They couldn't look back for long. "No, Mark," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. "It's not a joke." I took a breath. This was the moment, the reason for the past 3 months of silence and planning. I looked at the beautiful red tablecloth, a gift from my husband. I looked at the ugly words sitting on top of it. "I thought," I said, my voice clear in the silent room, "that we should put everything on the table." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It was thick with shame and anger. No one moved. No one spoke. The baby, Leo, started to fuss, a small, unhappy sound that only made the quiet feel louder. Susan finally broke. "Carol, we didn't mean—" She trailed off, looking at her husband for help. He just stared at me, his jaw tight. Jessica sank into her chair, still holding the baby. Tears welled in her eyes and began to slide down her cheeks. "Grandma, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It was... we were just blowing off steam. It didn't mean anything." "It meant something to me," I said, keeping my voice soft. "It meant you didn't need any more of my ugly knitting. It meant you didn't need my dry casseroles. It meant you didn't need my boring stories." I looked at my son. "And it meant you didn't need that $5,000 check for your down payment. Did it, Jessica?" Mark slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "That's enough," he hissed. "You've made your point." "Yes," I said. "I believe I have." I turned and walked to the hall closet where I had left my coat. I didn't rush. I put it on, buttoning it slowly. I picked up my purse from the little table by the door. I could feel their eyes on my back. I walked back to the dining room archway and stood there for a final moment. They were all still frozen around the table, a perfect family portrait of misery. The beautiful meal I had cooked sat there, untouched. "The turkey is carved," I told them. "Don't let it get cold." Then I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The cold winter air felt clean on my face. It felt like freedom. When I got in my car, the engine turned over on the first try. The old Buick hummed along the empty streets. Christmas lights twinkled on all the houses, families inside, warm and full. I didn't feel sad. I felt hollowed out, but in a clean way, like a bowl that had been washed and set on a shelf to dry. My own little house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I left the bags of presents I had brought for them in the back seat of the car. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of gingerbread. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily. Tick, tock. My phone started to buzz in my purse. A text message, then another, then it started ringing. The screen lit up with Mark's name. I looked at it for a moment, then I pressed the button on the side to silence it. I set it on the kitchen counter, screen down. I wasn't hungry for a big meal. I made myself a piece of toast with butter and blackberry jam, my favorite. I ate it standing at the kitchen sink, looking out the window at the dark backyard. The silence in the house was a comfort. It was a silence I had chosen. The phone rang again. This time it was Jessica. I let it go to the answering machine. Her voice filled the quiet kitchen, shaky and tearful. "Grandma? Please, please pick up. I'm so sorry. I didn't..." Leo needs. Please call me. The machine clicked off. A few minutes later, Mark's voice boomed from the little speaker. He wasn't crying. He was furious. Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but you embarrassed this entire family. You ruined your grandson's first Christmas. You need to call me. Right now. I rinsed my plate, dried it, and put it away. I went into the living room, turned on a soft lamp, and sat in my armchair. I pulled one of my old Afghans over my lap. It was a rainbow of colours, a project I had made just for myself years ago. The wool felt warm and familiar. My friend Margaret called around 9 o'clock. I saw her name on the screen and I answered it. Her voice was cheerful. Carol, Merry Christmas. I was just calling to see how your dinner was. Merry Christmas, Margaret, I said. My voice sounded normal. Dinner was very interesting. Oh? She said, and I could picture her settling into her own armchair, phone tucked under her chin. Did Jessica's new baby spit up on the turkey? I let out a small laugh. It felt good. No, nothing like that. I just decided to redecorate their dining room. A little early spring cleaning, you could say. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She was smart. She knew my voice. Carol, are you all right? For the first time in a long time, Margaret, I said, looking around my peaceful, quiet living room. I think I am. The next morning, there was a loud knock on my front door. Not a polite tap, a demanding one. I knew it was Mark before I even looked through the peephole. He was standing on my porch, his shoulders hunched against the cold. He was alone. I opened the door. Mark, I said. It wasn't a question. Are you going to let me in? He asked. His face was blotchy and his eyes were tired. I stepped back and he walked into the entryway, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He didn't take off his coat. What was that yesterday? He demanded. What in God's name has gotten into you? I think you know, I said calmly. I wasn't going to argue. I was done with arguments. It was a private conversation, a joke. You had no right to do that to us. To Jessica. She cried all night. I looked at my son, my only child. I saw a man who was angry about being caught, not about what he had done. And you laughed, Mark. Was that a joke too? He didn't have an answer for that. He just shook his head and changed the subject. And the money, Mom? The check for the house? So you're just going to punish them? Punish your own grandchild? That money was a gift, Mark. It was never an entitlement, I said. I walked past him and into my living room. I sat down in my armchair. It was my house, my throne. I'm rethinking my finances. Rethinking, he sputtered. What does that mean? I didn't answer. I just looked at him. The silence stretched. He stood in my hallway, a stranger in a familiar place. Finally, he seemed to understand that I wasn't the same woman he had dropped off a turkey with. He turned and pulled the front door open. This isn't over, he said, his voice low. Yes, it is, I said to the empty hallway after the door slammed shut. I reached over to my knitting basket. My hands, which had felt so stiff and useless for months, felt steady. I picked up 2 needles and a ball of soft sea green wool, a colour just for me, and I began to knit. The week between Christmas and New Year's is usually a quiet, sleepy time. For me, it was the beginning of something new. On Wednesday, I drove to the community centre downtown. The halls smelled of floor polish and coffee from the seniors' lounge. I saw a flyer on the bulletin board. Knitting for a cause. Blankets for the Children's Hospital. All skill levels welcome. I walked into the room. A dozen women sat around long tables, their needles clicking like a room full of clocks. The air was warm and full of the soft scent of wool. A woman with bright silver hair and glasses on a chain looked up and smiled at me. "Come on in, hun. There's plenty of room." Her name was Betty. She showed me the basket of donated yarn, a rainbow of colours. I chose a soft yellow. "I haven't knitted for anyone but family in years," I admitted, my voice a little rusty. Betty patted my hand. Her skin was soft and papery. "Well," she said, her eyes twinkling, "now you're knitting for family you just haven't met yet." On Friday, Susan called. Her voice was cautious, like someone walking on a frozen pond. "Carol, I was just calling to see how you are." "I'm very well, Susan. Thank you for asking," I said. I was watering my African violets on the windowsill. The sun was making their fuzzy leaves glow. "That's good," she said, a little too quickly. "Listen, Mark is he's worried about you. We're all worried. What you did at Christmas was so not like you." I set the watering can down. "You're right, Susan. It wasn't like me. The old me would have smiled and eaten your insults along with the dry turkey." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "It wasn't an insult, Carol. It was a private group for dealing with me." I finished for her. "I understand perfectly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. Margaret and I started a new tradition. We went out for lunch every Tuesday at a little diner that served the best chicken pot pie. The booths were cracked red vinyl, and the coffee was strong. The air smelled of grease and sugar. "So, the daughter-in-law called?" Margaret asked, stirring cream into her coffee. The spoon clinked against the thick ceramic mug. I nodded, taking a bite of my pie. The crust was flaky and buttery. "She said they were worried about me." Margaret snorted. "They're not worried about you. They're worried about their inheritance, and their built-in babysitter, and their private chef." She took a sip of coffee. "Men like your Mark, they don't like it when the furniture starts talking back." I looked out the diner window at the people walking by on the sidewalk. I didn't feel like furniture anymore. I felt like a person. That weekend, I took the checkbook out of my desk drawer. The check for $5,000 made out to Jessica was still there. My signature looked like a stranger's. I took a pen and wrote "Void" across the front in big, clear letters. Then I tore it into 4 neat pieces and dropped them in the trash can. I wrote a new check. This one was for the same amount. I made it out to the county animal shelter. I remembered Frank and I getting our old dog, Buddy, from there 30 years ago. He was the best dog. I put the check in an envelope with a little note, sealed it, and put a stamp on it. It felt right. It felt clean. A week later, a letter arrived. The envelope was a pale pink, and I recognized Jessica's loopy handwriting. I opened it with my thumb, not a letter opener. It was a card with a picture of a kitten on the front. Inside, she had written, "Grandma, I know you're angry. I hope someday you can forgive us. We miss you. Leo misses his great-grandma." There was no real apology, no understanding, just a wish for things to go back to the way they were, back when I was useful. I read it once, then I folded it and put it in the back of my desk drawer with Frank's old army medals and my mother's recipes. It was just a piece of paper. It had no power over me. I went back to my armchair, where my sea green scarf was waiting. The stitches were even and strong. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The dirty snow melted, and the first green tips of my crocuses pushed through the cold soil. My knitting group at the community centre had become the anchor of my week. We didn't just knit. We talked. We shared recipes and complained about our aching joints. We celebrated small victories. One afternoon, Betty and I were folding a stack of small, colourful blankets destined for the hospital. The pile was soft and bright. "You know, Carol," she said, holding up a yellow and white striped one I had made, "you have a real gift. These stitches are perfect." "My niece used to say my knitting was ugly," I said. The words came out easily, with no sting. Betty looked at me over her glasses. "Well then, your niece is a fool." She folded the blanket neatly. "Some people don't know how to recognize a gift when it's given to them." In March, a thick, expensive-looking card arrived in the mail. It was an invitation to my great-grandson Leo's christening. My name was written on the envelope in Susan's neat, careful script. I opened it in the kitchen. Inside, there was a professional photo of the baby, looking plump and serious in a little suit. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. "We hope you will be there. The family isn't the same without you." I put the invitation on the counter next to a thank you note from the animal shelter. The shelter's note had a picture of a smiling pit bull on it. It said my donation had paid for a month's worth of medical care for their older dogs. I looked from the smiling dog to the serious baby. I took the christening invitation and dropped it into the recycling bin with the junk mail. A young woman named Maria sometimes volunteered at the community centre. She was a single mother with a baby girl who had been born much too early. One Wednesday, Maria came in looking exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed. The baby, she told us, had to stay in the hospital for another month. That night, I went through my yarn basket. I found the softest wool I owned, a skein the colour of cream. It was finer than anything I would have used for my own family. I stayed up late, my needles clicking quietly in the lamplight. I made the tiniest hat imaginable, and a small blanket no bigger than a cloth napkin. The stitches were small and tight, a shield of warmth. I gave it to Maria the next day. She held the little hat in the palm of her hand, and her face just crumpled. "Oh," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "It's the first beautiful thing she's ever had." She hugged me, her thin shoulders shaking. "Thank you. Thank you, Carol." In that moment, I felt more love than I had in any of Jessica's sugary sweet hugs. April was warm enough to work in the garden. I bought 3 new rose bushes and a flat of tomato seedlings. Margaret came over to help me plant. The sun was warm on our backs, and the air smelled of damp earth and fertilizer. We wore big, floppy hats and old sneakers. "Heard from the kids lately?" she asked, tamping down the soil around a big boy tomato plant. "Just an invitation," I said, digging a hole for a rose bush. The thorns pricked at my gloves. I declined. "Good for you," she said. We worked in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds were the scrape of our trowels and the chirping of birds. Later, we sat on my porch steps, drinking tall glasses of iced tea. "You seem different, Carol," Margaret said, looking at me. "Lighter." I thought about that. She was right. I had spent so many years carrying the weight of my family's expectations. Now my hands were just dirty from the garden. It was a good feeling. My mornings became my favourite time of day. I would wake up early, before the sun, and the house would be still and quiet. I'd make a cup of coffee and take it out to the back porch. This morning, the air was cool and sweet, with the smell of dew on the grass. The sea-green scarf I had been knitting for myself was finished. I wrapped it around my neck. The wool was soft against my skin. I sat in my old wicker chair and watched the sky turn from grey to pink to a soft, hopeful gold. A robin landed on the fence, sang its song and flew away. The world was waking up, and so was I. I took a sip of my coffee. It was warm and just a little bit bitter, and it tasted like the rest of my life. It tasted wonderful.